Welcome to the second in the series of India Avenue podcasts. My name is Mugunthan Siva. I'm one of the co-founders and the CIO of the firm. Today I thought we'd talk about SMSFs in Australia. At the end of March 2025, there were 600,000 plus SMSFs with over 1.1 million members and close to $1 trillion Australian of assets. That's 24% of Australia's giant 3.9 trillion pool of assets in superannuation. That averages to approximately 1.5 million in each SMSF. ASX listed shares tend to be about 25 to 27% of the pool. Property is another 17%. Cash and term deposits are 16%. These three assets together, that's ASX shares, property and cash, add up to about 60% of SMSF assets. Overseas investments, on the other hand, appear to make up just 5 to 10% of the assets. However, should overseas investments be a bigger part of the pie? Australia is just over 1% of the global economy, remember. Hence, by investing only in Australian assets, SMSF investors could be missing out on 99% of the opportunity set. While Australian assets have a greater degree of familiarity for investors compared to global investments, it's still worth considering that foreign assets can diversify your portfolio and you can benefit from growth that's occurring overseas. When you look at this chart, you can see that global growth across different regions in the world, and we've put here Australia, US, China and India. The global growth patterns are very much growing at a faster pace in regions like India and China. India has taken over leadership in terms of GDP growth from 2015, and according to IMF, the International Monetary Fund's World Economic Outlook, the data looks like it favours faster growing economies in regions like India in the future, relative to, say, the US or Australia. Developed and more mature economies like Australia and US are experiencing GDP growth typically around 2 to 3%. And, it means their economies are expanding at this pace currently and are likely to do so over the next phase of 5 years. However, China, which grew, very rapidly from, say, 1980 to 2020, at rates of economic growth close to 5 to 15% in real terms, is now starting to become more mature and slowing growth towards 4 to 5%. Still impressive for such a large economy. And then we have the case of India, which took over as the world's fastest growing major economy in 2015. And post the pandemic in 2020, India's growth has continued in real terms, that is, after inflation, to grow at over 6% per annum. The International Monetary Fund expects this to continue at least for the next 5 years, as India well and truly establishes its position as a top 3 world leading growth economy. For investors, the significance of this growing economy is that companies operating within the ecosystem can benefit from rising demand for goods and services from industries like banking, technology, infrastructure, and consumption, to name a few. Given most SMSFs are set up to build long-term wealth, an allocation to companies in India through an active managed fund like the India Avenue Equity Fund can provide exposure to India's growth story as part of an SMSF portfolio. For example, today the fund holds significant exposure in India's IT services and pharmaceutical companies. Australia does not have a significant presence in these industries that is listed on the ASX. Therefore, SMSF investors can benefit from exposure to fast-growing industries in other parts of the world that might be typically more difficult to identify on the ASX. Investments in Indian companies can also provide exposure to new and lowly correlated themes to existing portfolios. For example, investing in India's two-wheeler manufacturers, motorbikes like Hero Motorcorp, Eicher Motors and Bajaj Auto, give Australian investors exposure to something quite unique, a fast-growing, youthful society that likes to travel everywhere by motorbike. Or imagine investing in the equivalents of Burger King, McDonald's and other fast food chains, but benefiting from demand coming from 1.4 billion people rather than, say, Australia's 25 million people. For example, imagine the profits of Qantas if Australia had 1.4 billion people. So there are companies which are the equivalents of these large, well-known brands that are operating in India and benefiting from India's young, youthful demographic, 1.4 billion people, average age 29, which is now wanting to consume more goods and services going forward as the level of wealth rises in that country. Therefore, investing in companies benefiting from different population size and ages, different regulations and laws, and a totally different growth trajectory altogether can introduce diversification and growth to investor portfolios that might be required in your SMSF. Thank you. I'm Magunthan Siva.